One small act of kindness can change everything. A poor young black girl barely had enough food for herself, but when she saw a hungry old couple, she gave them her only meal. That night, she went to bed starving. But the very next morning, there was a knock on the door, and standing there was a billionaire, ready to change her life forever. So, let's move forward with the story. The night was cold, and the streets of the small neighborhood lay silent except for the faint hum of passing cars far away. In a dimly lit apartment, a young black girl named Amina sat at a tiny wooden table, staring at the steaming plate of food in front of her. It wasn't much, just a small portion of rice and a piece of bread. But for her, it meant everything. It was the only meal she could afford that day after hours of working at a local store, lifting heavy boxes and standing on her feet until her legs ached. Her stomach growled in protest, but before she could take her first bite, a soft knock echoed from her thin apartment door. She hesitated for a moment, wondering who it could be at such an hour. Slowly, she rose, pulled her old sweater tighter around her shoulders, and opened the door. Standing there was an elderly couple, fragile, shivering, their faces pale with exhaustion. Their clothes looked worn, and their eyes carried the silent plea of people who hadn't eaten properly in days. The old man spoke first, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry, miss, we didn't mean to disturb you. We're so hungry. Do you happen to have anything at all, that you could spare?" Amina's heart clenched. She looked back at her small table, at the single plate of food waiting for her. It was all she had, the only thing that would fill her empty stomach. For a second, her mind screamed at her to keep it. She had worked hard all day, hadn't she? Didn't she deserve this one meal? But then she looked into the tired, pleading eyes of the couple. Their frail hands trembled, and the old woman leaned heavily on her husband's arm just to stand. A deep silence filled the room, and in that silence, Amina made a choice that would change her life forever. She smiled gently and stepped aside. "Please come in." The couple hesitated, almost ashamed, but her kindness gave them courage. They walked inside slowly, and Amina guided them to the table. Without a second thought, she pushed the plate of food toward them. This is all I have tonight," she said softly. "But I think you need it more than I do." Tears welled in the old woman's eyes. She covered her mouth with her trembling hand, unable to speak. The old man tried to protest, shaking his head. "No, child, we can't take your only meal. It's not right." But Amina placed her hand on his, steady and warm. "Please, it would make me happy to share. Allah will provide for me tomorrow." The couple broke down in quiet gratitude. With shaking hands, they began to eat, whispering prayers for the girl who had given up her own comfort for strangers. Amina watched them with a strange mix of hunger and peace inside her chest. Though her stomach remained empty, her heart felt full. When the couple finished, they stood and held her hands tightly. "May God bless you, child," the old woman whispered. "May He open doors for you that you never thought possible." Amina smiled, though her eyes were tired. "Your prayers are enough for me." After they left, she sat alone in the silence, her body weak but her spirit strong. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket and went to sleep with the ache of hunger pressing against her ribs. But before drifting off, she whispered a quiet prayer of her own. "Ya Allah, I gave what I had. Please take care of me tomorrow." The next morning, Amina woke up early, just as the sun peeked through the cracked curtains of her small room. She washed her face, dressed in her simple work clothes, and headed out to her job. She had no breakfast, no energy, but she carried the memory of the old couple's grateful eyes as fuel to keep her moving. Little did she know, that act of kindness had already set something in motion, something far greater than she could have imagined. Because while she was struggling through her day, somewhere not too far away, A man of immense power and wealth was preparing to walk down a path that would soon lead directly to her door. This man was known across the city as Mr. Jonathan Reed, a billionaire businessman whose name was tied to towering skyscrapers, luxury hotels, and companies that shaped the economy itself. He was a man who had everything money could buy, yet deep inside, he carried a restless void, an ache that wealth couldn't fill. He had been searching for something, though he couldn't quite name it, and fate, strange and unpredictable as it often is, was about to bring Amina and Jonathan together in a way neither of them expected. But that night, as the city lights blinked awake, Amina sat in her small room once again, unaware that destiny was already knocking, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The following day stretched endlessly for Amina. She worked long hours at the local convenience store, stocking shelves, mopping the floor, and assisting customers with a smile even when her body screamed for rest. Her manager barked orders carelessly, never once noticing how pale and tired she looked. By the time her shift ended, she had earned just enough to cover part of her rent and maybe a loaf of bread for dinner. She walked home slowly, the soles of her worn shoes slapping against the pavement. The street lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks. Passing by a bakery, the smell of freshly baked bread hit her like a wave, and her stomach twisted painfully. She looked longingly at the golden loaves displayed in the window, but she shook her head and kept walking. Her money had to stretch. Every coin mattered. Back in her small apartment, she set the bread she had bought on the table and poured herself a glass of water. As she took a small bite, she remembered the old couple's faces, the relief, the gratitude, the tears shining in their eyes. A warmth spread through her chest again. Maybe that's enough, she whispered to herself. Maybe that's worth more than a full meal. Meanwhile, in a mansion on the other side of the city, Jonathan Reed sat in his grand study. The room was lined with towering bookshelves, crystal chandeliers, and polished marble floors that reflected the glow of the fire in the fireplace. He sipped from a glass of wine, but found no pleasure in it. Around him lay wealth in every form. Paintings worth millions, rare artifacts from across the world, priceless furniture. Yet his heart was heavy. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair, closing his eyes. He was in his 60s now, a man who had conquered industries and built empires, but he often asked himself, for what? He had no wife beside him, no children to carry his name. He had spent his life chasing deals and power, only to return each night to empty halls echoing with silence. That evening, his driver told him about a scene he had witnessed earlier in the poor side of town. "Sir," the driver said softly, "I saw a young girl give away her only meal to two hungry strangers. She had nothing, yet she gave everything. I couldn't stop thinking about it." Jonathan frowned. "A girl?" "Yes," the driver nodded. "She couldn't have been more than 20. She lives in a rundown building, but sir, her kindness, it was unlike anything I've seen. It reminded me that there are still people with pure hearts in this world." The words lingered in Jonathan's mind long after his driver left. Something about the story stirred something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity grew, mixed with a strange admiration. Who was this girl? What kind of person gives away their only food to complete strangers? Sleep escaped him that night. Instead, Jonathan stared at the ceiling, the image of a girl he had never met growing clearer in his imagination. By morning, he had made a decision. He wanted to meet her, not as a billionaire with money to throw around, but as a man seeking to understand the kind of heart that could shine so brightly in the darkest of places. The next day, Amina was scrubbing the store floor when her manager called her name. "Hey, there's someone asking for you outside." Confused, Amina wiped her hands and stepped out. A sleek black car waited at the curb, its surface shining like a mirror. A man in a crisp suit stood by it, tall and imposing. He looked at her with a polite smile. Miss Amina? She froze. Yes, my name is Robert, the man said. I work for Mr. Jonathan Reed. He would like to meet you. Her brows furrowed. Jonathan Reed? The billionaire? The man nodded. Yes, he's asked me to personally invite you to his home. Amina's heart pounded. This didn't make sense. Why would a man like Jonathan Reed even know her name, let alone invite her to his mansion? Fear and disbelief mingled in her chest. I think you've made a mistake, she stammered. No mistake, Robert replied calmly. Mr. Reed heard about your act of kindness. He insists on meeting you. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her mind raced with questions. Should she go? What if it was a trap? But something in Robert's steady gaze reassured her. After a long pause, she whispered, All right. That evening, the sleek car carried Amina out of her poor neighborhood, through bustling city streets, and finally toward towering gates that opened to reveal a mansion unlike anything she had ever seen. Her breath caught in her throat as she gazed at the sprawling estate, the manicured gardens, the fountains that sparkled in the fading sunlight. It felt like a dream, or perhaps another world entirely. The car stopped, and Robert opened the door for her. This way, Mississippi. Her legs trembled as she stepped onto the marble steps. The door swung open, and there he was, Jonathan Reed himself. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in an elegant suit, yet his eyes were kind, curious. Miss Amina, he said warmly, extending his hand. Welcome to my home. Amina's throat went dry. She had no idea what awaited her inside, but deep down, she sensed that this meeting was about to change the course of her life forever. The grand mansion swallowed Amina the moment she stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Marble floors stretched endlessly, and portraits of powerful men and women lined the walls. It was overwhelming, a world far beyond anything she had ever known. She clutched her worn bag tightly against her chest, feeling out of place in her simple clothes. Jonathan Reed watched her carefully. Despite all the grandeur, it was the girl's humility that struck him most. She stood nervously at the entrance, as though afraid her very footsteps might stain the polished floor. He smiled gently, breaking the silence. Please, don't be afraid. You are my guest. Amina lowered her gaze, her voice soft. I don't understand, sir. Why did you call me here? I'm just no one important. Jonathan's eyes softened. On the contrary, you are very important. You gave up your meal for people you didn't even know. In a world where greed rules, kindness like yours is rare. I wanted to meet the heart behind that act. Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. I only did what felt right. Anyone would have done the same. He chuckled, shaking his head. No, child. Not everyone. In my world, I see people cling to what they have, always afraid to lose. You, with nothing, chose to give everything. That is extraordinary. He gestured toward a large dining table, covered in silver trays and steaming dishes. Come, sit, eat with me. Hesitant at first, Amina finally obeyed. She hadn't seen such food in months. Roast chicken, fresh bread, steaming vegetables, fruits that gleamed like jewels. Her stomach growled loudly, and she blushed, lowering her head. Jonathan noticed and smiled warmly. Please don't be shy. This table is yours too tonight. As she ate, slowly at first and then with more ease, Jonathan asked her about her life. She told him about her long hours at the store, about struggling to pay rent, about the loneliness of living without family. She spoke softly, never complaining, but her words painted a picture of hardship that touched him deeply. "You've faced so much," Jonathan murmured, "and yet you gave away the little you had. Why?" Amina paused, her fork resting on her plate. "Because hunger is temporary, but dignity, kindness, those last forever. I've been hungry before, and I'll be hungry again. But if I can ease someone else's pain, even for a moment, then my hunger is worth it. Her words struck him like a hammer to the chest. He leaned back, staring at her in wonder. You speak with the wisdom of someone far older than you. She smiled faintly. Life teaches, sir. Sometimes the hard way. That night, after dinner, Jonathan asked Robert to drive her home safely. But before she left, he said quietly, Amina, may I see you again? She hesitated, unsure why a man of his stature would want to spend more time with someone like her. Still, something in his voice, gentle, almost pleading, made her nod. Yes, sir. The following days turned into weeks. Jonathan invited her often, not with extravagance but with genuine interest. Sometimes they would walk in his garden, where he listened as she spoke about her dreams. Other times, they sat in his study, where she read aloud from books while he closed his eyes, enjoying the calm her voice brought. For the first time in years, Jonathan felt alive. Amina's presence filled the empty spaces in his mansion, her laughter echoing through halls that had long stood silent. She reminded him of something he had forgotten, that true wealth is not measured in gold or property, but in kindness, honesty, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jonathan turned to her. Amina, do you know why I worked so hard all these years? I thought money would buy me happiness. I thought power would give me peace. But I was wrong. All it gave me was emptiness. She looked at him with compassion. Then maybe God sent you a reminder, she said softly. That happiness lives in giving, not taking. Her words sank deep into his soul. That night, Jonathan lay awake, staring at the ceiling just as he had the night he first heard of her. But now, instead of emptiness, his heart carried hope. Meanwhile, life outside the mansion remained as hard as ever for Amina. Her landlord threatened eviction if she didn't pay the remaining rent, and her manager grew harsher by the day. But whenever she visited Jonathan, she found strength. She never asked him for money, never hinted at her struggles. She came only as herself, a girl with little to offer except her honesty and compassion. Jonathan noticed, and it only deepened his respect for her. He had met countless people who wanted his wealth, his name, his influence. But here was a girl who wanted none of it. She wanted only to be kind, to share, to live with dignity. It was during one of these visits, as rain pattered softly against the mansion windows, that Jonathan made a decision. He would not let her continue to struggle. He would find a way to change her life, not as charity, but as recognition for the light she carried. Amina, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. What would you do if you could change your life tomorrow? She blinked, surprised by the question. I don't know. Maybe open a small cafe, a place where people could eat, even if they had no money, a place where no one would leave hungry. Jonathan's lips curved into a slow smile. A cafe of kindness, he murmured. That sounds beautiful. Little did Amina know, Jonathan was already planning something far beyond her dreams. Days passed, and Amina's life continued in its fragile balance. She worked, she saved, she prayed. The dream of her small cafe lingered in her mind like a distant star, bright but far beyond reach. She never expected anyone else to take it seriously. After all, who would believe in the dream of a poor girl who could barely afford her rent? But Jonathan Reed was not just anyone. For weeks after that rainy evening, he secretly began to set plans in motion. He contacted his lawyers, his architects, his accountants. He gave them quiet instructions. Find a location, design a space, and prepare everything for a cafe unlike any other. A place where meals would be served with dignity, where kindness was currency, and no one would walk away hungry. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued to spend time with Amina, never revealing his plan. He wanted to know her heart better, to ensure that her kindness was not a passing moment, but the very essence of who she was. And every time they met, she proved it again and again. One evening, Jonathan invited her to the mansion once more. The fire crackled in the study, casting warm light across the polished shelves. He poured tea for both of them, his hands trembling slightly. This was the night he would begin to reveal his intentions. "Amina," he began slowly, "do you ever wonder why life brings certain people together?" She looked thoughtful. "Sometimes, yes. I think God connects hearts for a reason. Maybe to teach us something, or to guide us where we're meant to be." Jonathan nodded. "I believe that too. And I believe meeting you was no accident." Her brows furrowed, unsure what he meant. But he continued, his voice steady. "You've shown me something I lost long ago. The power of simple kindness. And I want to do something for you. Not because I pity you, but because I believe in you." She shifted uncomfortably, shaking her head. "Sir, please. I don't want charity." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes earnest. "This isn't charity. This is partnership. You dreamed of a cafe, didn't you? A place where no one goes hungry." Her breath caught in her throat. She nodded slowly. "Yes, but that's only a dream." "Dreams," Jonathan said softly, "are only impossible until someone believes in them. And I believe in yours." Tears pricked her eyes. You would help me?" "I will do more than help," he replied. "I will build it with you." The words hung in the air like music, too beautiful to be real. Amina's hands trembled as she clasped them together, struggling to hold back tears. For the first time, her dream felt within reach, but with joy came fear. "Sir, what if I fail? What if I disappoint you?" Jonathan smiled gently. "Failure is nothing compared to never trying, and I would never be disappointed in someone who dares to give hope to others." That night, Amina went home with her heart racing, her mind swirling. She lay awake in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, whispering prayers of gratitude. Was this really happening? Could her life truly change this much, this quickly? In the days that followed, Jonathan took her to see the site he had chosen. It was a cozy corner building in the heart of the community, close enough to the poor neighborhoods where hunger was common, yet warm and welcoming in its design. The windows were large, the space open and filled with light. Amina stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "This will be your cafe, but it will also be a beacon of kindness in this city. Together, we will make sure no one leaves hungry." The weeks turned into months as renovations began. Amina poured her heart into every detail, choosing colors, arranging tables, deciding on a menu that was simple but nourishing. And every step of the way, Jonathan stood beside her, offering guidance and resources, but never taking control. He wanted her to feel ownership, to know that this was her dream coming to life. The neighborhood buzzed with curiosity. Some whispered that the billionaire must have selfish motives, that nothing in this world came without strings. But others saw the light in Amina's eyes, the sincerity in her voice, and they believed. Finally, the day of opening arrived. The cafe stood ready, its sign painted with simple letters, "The House of Kindness." A line formed outside even before the doors opened. Families, children, old men and women, all drawn by the promise of a warm meal and a welcoming heart. Amina stood at the entrance, her hands trembling with nerves. Jonathan stood beside her, smiling proudly. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. More than ever. Together, they opened the doors. The first guests entered, greeted not with judgment or pity, but with warmth. Plates of food were served, laughter filled the air, and for the first time, Amina's dream became real. Jonathan watched her move through the cafe, welcoming each person, serving food with her radiant smile. And in that moment, he knew he had not only changed her life, she had changed his. The cafe quickly became more than just a place to eat. Within weeks, it turned into the heart of the community. People who had once walked the streets hungry now came with hope in their eyes. Mothers brought their children. Old men found comfort in warm bowls of soup, and strangers sat side by side at tables, sharing not only food but stories, laughter, and dignity. Amina was everywhere, welcoming guests at the door, carrying trays, encouraging volunteers, and sitting with those who needed a listening ear. She didn't treat anyone like a beggar. She treated them like family. Every smile she gave seemed to heal wounds deeper than hunger. Jonathan visited often, though always quietly. He didn't stand at the front or boast about his role. He preferred to watch from the corner, seeing Amina in her element, the glow in her eyes, the strength in her step. It was more powerful than anything his billions had ever achieved. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the cafe in shades of gold, an old couple walked in. Their faces were familiar, the same frail figures who had once knocked on Amina's door, trembling with hunger. When their eyes met hers, recognition sparked, followed by tears. The old woman clutched Amina's hands. "It's you," she whispered. "The girl who gave us her meal that night." Amina smiled through her tears. "And it's you. You prayed for me, remember?" The old man nodded, his eyes glistening. "We prayed that God would open doors for you. And look," he answered. Jonathan watched the reunion from a distance, his heart swelling. In that moment, he understood. What Amina had given that night was not just food. She had given faith. Faith that kindness still existed. That even the smallest act could ripple outward and change lives. Word of the cafe spread far and wide. Journalists came to write stories, calling it a miracle of kindness. People donated. Volunteers signed up. And soon the cafe was serving hundreds every week. Amina's dream had grown beyond anything she imagined. But perhaps the greatest transformation was in Jonathan himself. For decades, he had lived surrounded by wealth yet starved of meaning. Now, sitting in that cafe, watching Amina laugh with a child or comfort a weary soul, he felt a peace he had never known. She had given him something no amount of money could buy. A reason to live with purpose. One evening, as the cafe quieted after a long day, Jonathan asked Amina to sit with him. The last rays of sunlight streamed through the windows, painting her face in warm light. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Amina," he said softly, "do you know what you've given me?" She tilted her head. "Me? I've given nothing, sir. You're the one who gave me this chance." He shook his head firmly. "No, you gave me hope. You reminded me of what truly matters. Money builds walls, but kindness builds bridges. Because of you, my life finally has meaning." Her eyes filled with tears. "I only did what I thought was right. And that," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion, "is exactly why it's so powerful." Silence fell between them, comfortable and full of understanding. For the first time, Jonathan felt as though he wasn't looking at a girl from another world. Poor, fragile, far below his station. No, he was looking at someone far richer than himself, not in money, but in spirit. Weeks later, Jonathan made an announcement that stunned the world. He declared that a large portion of his fortune would no longer go to business expansions or luxury projects. Instead, it would be invested in creating more cafes like Amina's across the country. Places where no one would go hungry and dignity would be served alongside meals. The press called it the Reed Foundation for Kindness. But when reporters asked Jonathan why he had chosen this path, he smiled and said only, "Because one young woman reminded me of what wealth truly means." Standing beside him at the press conference, Amina lowered her head humbly. She never sought recognition, never wanted fame. All she wanted was to serve. And now, Her simple act of sharing one plate of food had sparked a movement that would feed thousands. The old couple, the very ones who had started it all, were honored guests at the opening of the second cafe. They sat in the front row, their eyes glistening with pride. When asked to speak, the old woman said, "We were starving when she gave us her meal, but what she really gave us was life. And through her, God has given life to so many more." That night, after all the cameras had gone and the noise had faded, Amina returned to her tiny apartment. She sat at the same old table where, months ago, she had once placed her only meal before strangers. She touched the wooden surface and whispered, "Ya Allah, thank you. You took my hunger and turned it into hope." Her journey was far from over, but she knew one thing with certainty: kindness never dies. It multiplies, it echoes, and it returns in ways more powerful than anyone can imagine. And somewhere deep inside, Jonathan Reed knew that knocking on her door that day had been the best decision of his entire life. Because sometimes, the smallest sacrifice can open the greatest door. One that leads not just to food on a table, but to a future filled with faith, love, and a legacy of kindness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you love powerful, life-changing stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.